Ideal mesmo para o mundo atual seria fazer o ensino médio junto com o curso técnico, certo? É no Senac que o aluno tem autonomia de verdade, formação cidadã, foco na diversidade, preparação para o Enem, material didático sem taxas e muito mais. Na real, tem tudo que você precisa para se sentir preparado para a vida. Seja para entrar no mundo do trabalho ou te ajudar a decidir o que fazer na faculdade. Quer saber? Senac. Vem comigo. Acesse sp.senac.br/ensino-médio-técnico.
Hello. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. So let me introduce my next speaker I've gotten to know over the years. And I'll ask him what's going on in his beautiful state where people seem to have lost their mind. For years, we've always joked about Florida man, and it's only a matter of time before we start joking about Arizona man. But the former governor of Arizona, now with Citizens for Free Enterprise, you'll notice one of my themes here this year, completely intentionally, is to defend the free market, because there are so many people on our side now who are new to our side, who aren't sure they believe in a free market. But also, we got this wild world of politics, and just as Georgia is one of the big swing states, the state where he used to be the governor, also one of the big swing states, and he happened to be an extremely fantastic governor who, as a Georgian who loves my state being an economic engine, I'm kind of really glad he's not there, because the new governor is not as job and business friendly as he was when he was there. But we'll talk about all of that on stage with the former governor of Arizona, Doug Ducey. Thank you. All right, so I've got to just start with, the raw political question before we get into everything else. Arizona and the Republican Party, as an outsider looking in, it just seems like we always joke Republicans like to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, and it just seems like you guys in Arizona really want to do that sometimes.
Well, I think first I want to say thank you for having me here. It's great to be here. I'm a big fan of yours, Eric. I think you are a voice of reason on the right. I think we've had a void since Rush has left us, and I want to thank you for standing in the gap.
Oh, that's very flattering. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I also think I can really legitimately make the case that Arizona is still a center-right state, and I'd offer a couple statistics. I won the governorship in 2014 by 12 points, and the wind was at our back as Republicans. I won re-election in 2018 by 14 points, a larger margin, and I won 44% of the Hispanic vote against an opponent named David Garcia.
He was French, right? Yeah.
Well, it just shows when we don't play identity politics, and we shouldn't, because we wouldn't be very good at it. But when we get in those rooms and make the case for our ideas, we win, and we can win by bigger margins. But candidates matter, campaigns matter, and I think if we would have had the proper nominee for governor in 2022, we would have won by 8 or 10 points. But we are where we are right now, and there are some platelets that are shifting, and I think some things are resetting. It's part of the reason why I set up Citizens for Free Enterprise. We want to educate and advocate for free enterprise, but we also want to activate voters on timeless, evergreen principles that really differentiate our country. So we're on the ground in Arizona, and we're on the ground in Georgia right now. I'm good friends with Brian Kemp, and I believe we can deliver these states and bring new people into the system, but we are in a spot right now in Arizona, and we're going to have to navigate out of it.
Okay, so before I go on, and this is a complete tangent off everything, hitting my 40s, I needed to develop a good hobby, and golf in Arizona and golf courses. How does one play golf in Scottsdale in the summer without dying?
You got to go out early. If you tee off, if you're first off the tee box, you can be done by 11 and you're at the pool by noon. But summer's going to be here any day in Arizona. It's hot.
Okay. Now, Citizens for Free Enterprise, it's been a theme of mine, and I feel like I keep beating my head with people on the right who feel that they have a misunderstanding of what free enterprise is, I guess, to a degree, that, oh, by free enterprise, we're allowing these corporations to push woke values. We have to fight back, which means we must become against free enterprise, which I don't think that's the case at all. And it seems to me that it's not a matter of like communists say, well, we've never really tried communism. We actually have tried the free market in this country, and it worked quite well. But now we've gotten to a point where both sides seem to want to have the power to pick the winners and losers, which only does perpetuate corporations carrying out a political agenda.
We don't beat Democrats by becoming them. And I have spoken out against this big government republicanism that I see creeping in on the right, because I think we're only sharpening the knife that the left will eventually use on us. There's a lot of freedoms that are worth fighting for in this country, and they've been articulated by your previous guests very well. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion. But it really has been this freedom to pursue the American dream, to seek opportunity that has helped differentiate our country. I mean, part of the reason we are so consequential around the world is because our economy has been so innovative, and we have created such wealth that it's funded the greatest military force in the history of the world, and it's allowed us to overcome a lot of the stupid spending decisions that have happened in Washington, D.C. And if we're to lose that, then so much of our might dries up, and we need to be the spokespeople and the defenders and the advocates of free enterprise and proper free enterprise principles. The other thing I want to say is, I think you can see by the net inflow into Georgia, I'm very proud that Arizona is among the fastest growing states in the country. Americans vote with their feet. Voters are smart, and so are consumers. Look what they've done and how they've punished some of these corporations that have made really poor woke decisions.
You say that about Arizona and Georgia, and the thing we both have in common, although probably we still have it worse than you guys, is the traffic because of all these people coming in. Californians do not know how to drive.
No. You should see when it rarely rains in Arizona, then it's real trouble with the Californians.
It's like snow here, yes. Okay, so I want to go back to identity politics because one of the terms that infuriates me, and I understand why people use it, is either a Hispanic voter or Latino voter, except these are people from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Venezuela, Brazil, Argentina, Peru, and we're treating all of these people from different life stories in different countries as if they're just this one homogenous group, and that's what the left does, as opposed to, on our side, it seems like we used to say, you're from Guatemala, but you want to be an American, welcome.
I think for me, one of the eye-opening stories, there were several, but there's a very successful individual in Arizona named Ernie Garcia. He's the Carvana individual. And he was a bundler for Barack Obama and a committed Democrat. He left the Democratic Party. He wasn't a big fan of mine and when I first started running for office. And then he saw how I came into some of these rooms and spoke to people, and he decided to support me. And I said, Ernie, what was the conversion? And he said, you're talking to everybody as if they're Americans. And my thing is, if you're a citizen and you can vote, you're an American, not a hyphenated American. You're an American. And I really found out, and Arizona was the first state in the nation to pass universal ESAs, educational savings account. We were the first state to get it over the finish line. And that was most powerful in some of our more hostile rooms where there weren't a lot of Republicans, but there were people whose children were trapped in schools that weren't doing all that well. And they had the same value that they wanted to work hard, climb the economic ladder, and wanted their children to learn something of value in school. And they were the ones that helped get those votes.
You know, you mentioned that. I had this defining moment when I was first starting in radio when Governor Nathan Deal here fought for charter schools in the state, and it was the NAACP and black church pastors who were opposed, and I started getting this massive number of black women calling my program. I'll never forget this one woman she called. She was crying the entire time she was on radio, explaining that she worked 2 jobs to keep her family together. Her mother came over in the morning to get the kids ready for school while she went to work. While the kids were at school, she came home, took a nap, went to another one. She wanted to help the kids with homework. With Common Core, she didn't understand how to teach them math. They told her she could come in. She just wanted a way to get her kids out of the school, and so she was supporting the charter school reform. And then you had Arizona and you had Florida, and you've seen these demographic shifts towards the right, largely because of the school choice issue. And I sometimes, like Republicans, why aren't all of you embracing this issue?
Well, every Republican governor should be embracing this. This is the biggest issue at the state level. The most amount of spending in every state budget is in K-12 education. And in so many places, K-12 education is failing. It's been flatlining since 1982. It took me all of 8 years to get this done, and at some points I didn't think I would be able to get it done. Nobody had done it before, and it was actually during COVID and 2020. The leader of the Black Mothers Forum, a woman named Janelle Wood, somehow got into the governor's office during the George Floyd riots. I had called out the National Guard and put out an 8 p.m. curfew, and Janelle was unhappy with me. She said, "My students don't feel that they can have their voice heard, Governor, and they're angry." And I said, "Janelle, no reason for them to be angry. They can have their voices heard peacefully until 8 p.m. and then they can get a good night's sleep." She wasn't happy, but she said, "I wish there was something that we could agree on." And I said, "How do you feel about school choice?" And we began a conversation that led to her sitting next to Angela Ducey, the First Lady, in my final State of the State, when I said from the podium, 50 years ago, politicians stood in the schoolhouse door and wouldn't let minorities in. Today, politicians stand in the schoolhouse door and won't let minorities out. These kids are trapped in failing public schools, and it's time to set these families free. Janelle Wood, a Democrat, led the standing ovation. The African American pastors, not one of them a Republican, whipped the votes. We passed this by 1 vote in our House and 1 vote in our Senate. Now it's passed in 13 other states around the country. We're on the 1-yard line in Texas and the 1-yard line in Tennessee. This is the one reform that can truly renew our nation and reform K-12 education and put parents in charge of their children's education.
Amen to that. I remember that speech too. And it was such a good line that resonated, and it does seem to me we have all these people, like I was talking with Vice President Pence, that there's been this battle, I think, on the Republican and the Democratic side is American idea or is it just a country? When it's both, there's so many people who want to come to the country and be one of us, but they want to come because of the story and the idea. And it just seems like we have so many people here in the country, largely non-white, who are shut out of the story because their kids are shut into the public school.
I'm a conservative. I'm just not angry about it.
All said.
My friend Bill Lee in Tennessee says that, and I tell him I use it sometimes with attribution, sometimes without. But I do think when you look at, you had Ron DeSantis here earlier, you had Brian Kemp. These are excellent governors, but if you take a close look, it's a winning playbook. And it's a playbook you can walk into any room in your state and make the case on this. And like I said, the number one investment line or spending line, depending how you look at it, is in K-12 education. And a lot of folks start out hostile to some of these ideas. But sometimes I think we forget, as elected leaders, we think we have some power, and of course you do as governor. But your real power is the platform in which you're standing on. And I think we shouldn't forget that we are, when we're at our best, in the persuasion business. we do have the better ideas. The country is divided. It's divided politically, but I get a focus group once or twice a week, which is sitting coach on Southwest Airlines or American Airlines. And, undoubtedly somebody will say, what do you do, or where are you from? And, it's a 50% chance I'm going to be sitting next to someone who votes differently than I do. But through the course of that conversation and talking about some of the things that we were able to do in Arizona, or what you see happening in some of these other Republican states, the country is not divided on supporting our police force. They are not divided on proper spending around infrastructure, or divided on giving parents a choice so their kids can get a better education. And when we make those ideas properly, we win. Our ideas properly presented are winners. And it's not a 51-49 winner, it's an 80-20, it's a 90-10. And if we could find our way back to that, I think we'd be winning a lot more elections and making a lot more headway for the hearts and minds of the American people.
So let me talk to you about Citizens for Free Enterprise, because a lot of people, when they leave office, they go join some think tank, and you decided to impose the burden on yourself of starting a group. Why start a group as opposed to what's out there? What niche do you see that you feel called to really fill?
So I was really blessed as a governor. I had a great campaign team. I came from the private sector. Cold Stone Creamery was my company. It was started in Arizona, and I'll tell you, it's a great primer. You open up 1,440 ice cream stores in all 50 states. You get a real idea on what the economic policy is in that state.
I've got to stop you there, because now I got a bone to pick with you. Do you know how much money my son makes me spend every week because of you now?
Well, God bless you.
We just got one down the street from us. It's terrible.
It's good for you.
My wife, who's on this diet kick and pulls UPS trucks for fun, discovered the peanut butter ice cream blend at Cold City. You are a problem for my family.
We'll have this conversation after we're done. There might be some free ice cream in it for you. So the point I wanted to bring up is I was blessed with a very good campaign team and then a great policy team. It was when I became the chairman of the Republican Governors Association, and we had 38 governors races over the last 2 years, and I was able to see what was going on around the country. And thank goodness we have great governors like Brian Kemp, who had an incredible record and an excellent team. And also thank goodness that Stacey Abrams was not a very good gubernatorial candidate.
Amen. I hear she's a great president of Earth.
I love that line. But one thing I think we have to give Stacey Abrams her due on is she registered 800,000 new voters in the state of Georgia, a state that President Trump lost by 11,000. We today have 2 Democratic senators in the state of Georgia and 2 Democratic senators in the state of Arizona. And what I really noticed on the right is there was no one really doing the hard work of actually registering new voters, of getting into those hostile rooms. And you can probably tell I like going into hostile rooms and making the case for things I believe in. It should scare all of us to death if you went into a high school or a college classroom today with a placard that said socialism and capitalism. It's about a 50-50 proposition. So if we don't get back to making the case and then asking those young people to identify with certain principles that can influence their future career and pursuit of happiness, we're going to be really behind the 8 ball. And I think this idea, we want to work with state parties, but state parties are supposed to be in the business of registering voters, raising resources, and winning races. We want to bring those assets and data and knowledge to that. And when we have a party chairman that wants to be our partner, we'll be arm in arm. There's no turf war there. But if there's somebody that wants to work against a sitting Republican candidate, like we've experienced in some of these other states, we're going to be there to protect and defend.
So I get to nerd out with you here on this point, because in a former life, I ran campaigns, and I loved the ground game. And I don't think people understand. In fact, I had a lady call yesterday. Her name was Gretchen. I know because that's my sister's name. She's like, does knocking on doors really do anything? I was like, there's overwhelming data to show that the more you knock on someone's door and connect with them as a neighbor, the more likely they are to turn out and vote for your candidate. And it does seem like, as a state, and it doesn't matter whether it's Democrat or Republican, as that state becomes monopolistic towards one party, that party's ground game begins to collapse, and over time, it gives way for the other party to start knocking on the doors and building, which to some degree I think we saw here in Georgia, where the Republican Party began to rest on its laurels, and Stacey Abrams saw that and won, and how important it is to actually connect with your neighbor physically, not just on Facebook, but actually show up at their house where people don't want to be bothered anymore, and yet it actually works.
Campaigns matter. They make a huge difference, and we could talk about all kinds of examples where somebody had a better campaign. I also think that the candidate matters, but this ground game is a real difference maker, and Arizona, in a way, enjoyed an embarrassment of riches. As a red state, it wasn't that long ago that we weren't being contested in a presidential election. And I think a mindset crept in on the right that if I win the primary, I win. And that was true for some time. Well, it's not true today. And I think Arizona is very reflective of the country in many ways. We're 34% R, we're 33% D, and then the biggest party in the state, or equal to the Republican Party, are independents or non-affiliated. So once you win the Republican nomination, the Republicans are with you. They are going to vote for you. It's getting into those larger rooms where people are undecided or don't think about politics the way we do or with the same amount of intensity. And that's why I talk about this thought of presenting our ideas and persuading people, because when you make the case, there may not be that applause at the end of every line in these independent rooms, but people leave discerning that this is someone with an agenda, and it's action-oriented. And this will affect my life and my children's lives in a better way. Another thing that I think we fall into is we think because Californians are moving to a state that it's going to immediately corrupt it. Let's remember that Ronald Reagan was a Californian, and he would likely be leaving California at this time as well. And the only state that's had more Californians move to it than Arizona is Texas. So people leave California for a reason. I mean, Reagan said had the Pilgrims landed on the West Coast, they would have never bothered to discover the rest of the country. That's what California used to be. But decades of failed leadership and failed policy have people fleeing the Golden State. And it's benefiting many of these red states. But we do need to remind them why they left and why these ideas are in their best interest before we ask them to change party registration.
You know, it's interesting you say that. I remember the exit polling from 2022 that new Texas voters who had moved into the state tended to be far more conservative than the people who were lifelong Texans in urban and suburban areas. That stat just continues to stand out to me. Now, let me give you a quote. You can steal this one too. This is from James Carville, and I've always thought it was one of the best political quotes. The goal is not to win the primary. The goal is to win the election. And I do think more and more we see Democrats and Republicans both make mistakes by trying so hard to win the primary. They put themselves out there in such a way it actually makes it harder to convince independent voters to win the election in the general.
That's why I say that the candidate matters, because there is some discipline that's necessary in the campaign, and we should have raucous primaries. I mean, they should be competitive. The more the merrier. The water's warm. I think there were 14 candidates in my primary in 2014, and some of them were saying some outrageous things where they would maybe be tagged as the most conservative individual in the race. But my mindset was I wanted to be the most electable conservative in that race. And I didn't think there was any victory in winning a primary and being disqualified for a general. So that's why I say you have to know what you believe, and you have to be able to communicate it both in 30-second debate answers and also long-form interviews. And then you have to get out and make the case. Like Margaret Thatcher used to say before James Carville, win the argument, then win the vote.
I want to go back to something you said earlier where we risk as conservatives, if we forget what works, sharpening the knives the left uses to get us with. When I bring this up on radio and even with people here in the room perhaps, and the argument, the pushback I get so often is that we never actually do the things to prevent the knives from being sharpened, and so we might as well sharpen the knives and use them ourselves. And there is this, I think, creeping belief for a lot on the right that we're unilaterally disarming in ways that won't disarm the left. My argument has always been we've got to disarm the left, and we do that by getting rid of the power altogether. Throw the ring back in the volcano. How do you talk to people about that?
Well, I really try to make the case around the power that the consumer has, and there's examples that you can point out. The way that you really hurt these companies is to choose another product and to go elsewhere. And I do think we've been given a gift. I always think the other side is they've been at work for decades. And they have climbed into the wormwood of academia and a lot of these boardrooms. And we see it under different guises of ESG or DEI or CRT. But once we've gotten our arms around that, we've made a real headway in having the pendulum swing back to the right. And I think that's the only way we can do it, because if, God forbid, we were to have some success on these ideas from a big government perspective, and then they take power, think of what they could do with the powers that they saw under COVID. I don't know that there were many silver linings during COVID-19, but I do think there were two. One was school choice. We would have never gotten ESAs done in Arizona until parents saw what their kids were being taught or not taught over those little screens. They saw the indoctrination, and something that didn't pass in 2017 passed by a large margin, and they couldn't even get the signatures to recall it. The other silver lining of COVID is I think people really saw the difference between conservative leadership and Democratic leadership. I mean, these Democratic governors were closet authoritarians, locking down their states, mandating masks, demanding everyone get a vaccine. And it really was, if it wasn't for the red states, America would not have been open. But our red states were open. Our kids are doing better in those places. The economies are thriving, and Americans are moving to those places. And now I think people better understand the differences between the two parties.
Okay, as we're winding down here, I want to go back to Arizona. My family, we vacationed in Sedona several years ago. We've been trying to get back. That is a beautiful area. Beautiful. But also, the amount of crystal shops and like flaky people in Sedona was very, very interesting. If someone wants, what do you recommend if people go to Arizona? Like I've been to the Biltmore, I've been to Phoenix, I'm on the radio in Phoenix and Tucson. What do you recommend people see when they go to Arizona?
Well, if you can come out for spring training, we've got 16 of the Major League Baseball teams that are out there for March and April. It's the most beautiful time of the year.
Ron DeSantis is around. Note they don't all go to Florida these days.
And you're in Greater Phoenix and Scottsdale the entire time with these great spring training ballparks. And then I know you love golf here in Georgia, and you have the greatest tournament in the history of the world. We have a great tournament as well called the Phoenix Open.
Yes.
It's a little different than the Masters, and it's always the week leading up to the Super Bowl. Those are two incredible events. And then if you want to get outside of Phoenix, you know that Sedona is beautiful, but it also does have some of those idiosyncrasies of being around the vortex. And then Flagstaff, Arizona, in Coconino County and the White Mountains, you know, it snows there in the winter. It's got the most beautiful summer when it's hot in Phoenix, and that's actually where you want to go to play golf.
You know, you say that my daughter took a field trip to the Grand Canyon, and they went through Flagstaff, and it was like late March or April, and it was just snowing everywhere in Flagstaff. So beautiful area, and I love to like telescopes and look at stars at night. Talk about a dark city.
Beautiful open sky.
It's fantastic. So what's next for you? You're focused on Citizens Free Enterprise now. Does something come next for you? Do you have something on the horizon?
Well, I loved being governor. Of course, I loved leading Cold Stone Creamery as well. This has been a great transition for me to be a part of something with a purpose that keeps a foot in our cause that I think can make a difference as we navigate through where we are right now. I think I have an act or two left in me, but we'll let the future roll out and we'll see.
Well, listen, I can't thank you guys enough. One, for your help in putting this together with Citizens for Entrepreneurs. And two, just sitting here on stage and hanging out with me. I always enjoy our conversations.
It's a great crowd. Gives me a real jolt of positive energy. Thank you.
Thank you for all you're doing.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
If I can
and
ever do it.
really, you and this freaking ice cream company, the amount of money I spend.